Coming up in today's IdeaSpace podcast.
And I was thinking, you're running a $10 million facility. You've put down $500,000 of agrochemicals last year, and Bob might know where they were. At the same time, my phone can tell you what my heart rate was doing during that phone call to the moment, right?
Yeah.
It's really worth taking some time early in the business to understand where your lines of affordable loss are as a person. And what I mean by that is how much of your money can you spend on this, but also how much of your life are you willing to put into it?
Welcome to the IdeaSpace podcast. I'm Ben Hartley, head of IdeaSpace. IdeaSpace is a community of entrepreneurs, founders and their teams, many of them working alongside each other in one of our 3 offices based in and around Cambridge. Our members share knowledge, experience and expertise to help themselves and others in their high-impact venture creation. In this latest Startup Stories episode, we're talking with Jim McDougall, the co-founder of Outfield, an exciting startup that is making a real impact to the way that orchard growers can forecast their fruit yields. Combining innovative machine learning with drone technology, they help farmers manage the life cycle of fruit in their orchard, making farms more efficient, more profitable, and more sustainable. We'll talk about how Jim seized on interesting career opportunities, moved from a background in engineering to the world of horticulture startups via working on oil rigs. In the podcast, we will cover the early years of the company, how the products evolved and changed, and also the interesting dynamic between co-founders. We'll also delve into the mindset of the entrepreneur and talk honestly and openly about the difficulties of founding and running a successful startup. Right, Jim, thank you very much for joining us here in IdeaSpace West.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
And just for some context for anyone listening, we met sort of in a strange place.
We were swimming in the Cam on a Sunday morning in, I think, October.
It was October. Yes, I think it was cold.
It was pretty cold. You were the only person who wisely brought a wetsuit.
Yeah, I couldn't understand. I felt I was cheating because everyone else was in the Cam, swimming up and down the river, just in their swim trunks, and there was me like fully in my wetsuit. Anyway,
it takes a certain type, eh?
It does. But there's a really interesting group of people, aren't there, around Cambridge, involved in this sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem. I think someone that was there, Jeremy, he's in fintech.
That's right, he's a founder, yeah.
Yeah, a founder in fintech. And then there's Max was there, who's been involved in startups and is now a scout for an angel, angel investors.
As far as I can tell, Max was here in Cambridge before Cambridge was, and they built it around him. He seems to be the centre of all things.
Quick shout out to Max. We were just chatting earlier, actually, weren't we, about the fact that there's so many different types of people involved in startups and in this sort of entrepreneurial activity, and the fact that there doesn't seem to be any sort of single type. There are characteristics that seem to make a founder or an entrepreneur or somebody who works in startups, but you quickly learn that there are so many different people with different backgrounds in this game. Is it something that you had always thought you might end up in, running a startup, or is it something that just came out of nowhere?
Not exactly. I never really had a sort of a hard and fast ambition to be an entrepreneur. That wasn't the objective. And I think my co-founder Ollie was more inclined that way for a longer time. But I mean, I often say this: starting a business is often the stupidest way of doing anything, unless it's the only way of doing it. There are big companies out there with a lot more resources and a lot more talent and skills available. If they can do something, they'll probably beat you to it. For us, the only way we could see to fix the problems that we wanted to solve was by doing it ourselves, and that's really where the idea came from.
Right. So there was a problem that you saw first, and then you came up with a solution for it. Because it seems to be there's like literally either the two. There's we've got some technology, let's go and find, or an idea or a concept or product. Let's find where we can apply that. Or there's a problem, there's no solution, we'll find the solution.
Absolutely. I think that first version is usually the harder way to go, because trying to find a problem that fits the solution you've already got means you're kind of developing a client base from scratch. We were quite lucky the other way around, that we saw that there's a big problem evolving in the world. I'll get into that a little bit if that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where we originally came from, I was working in private equity in environmental social governance, which really means I was supporting big companies when they were buying large assets, for example, oil and gas or chemical facilities, and looking at what liabilities they were taking on around human slavery or around environmental damage or around risks and explosions. Now, when I was doing that, I was speaking to farmers who live next to a chemical facility, for example, and saying, what did you spray last year? What agrochemicals did you put down? Trying to get a baseline for what they were doing. And the guys would say, hey, Bob, what did we spray last year? And I was thinking, you're running a $10 million facility. You put down $500,000 of agrochemicals last year, and Bob might know where they were. At the same time, my phone can tell you what my heart rate was doing during that phone call to the moment, right?
Yeah.
So there was definitely a big lack of technology and a big lack of data available in the space, and it's because it's hard. It's massive. It's a really big sector, not just in terms of the size of the sector, but also the size of things within it. So at the same time, my co-founder Ollie was doing work in aeronautical engineering, and also is a real drone enthusiast and was very familiar with what the technology is capable of on that side. And so we put our heads together and were saying, well, there's a massive chasm between what can be done and what is being done. At the same time, as I think we all know, very popular in the zeitgeist now, but was, I guess, less spoken about then, we have to be making more food using less. We have massive pressures on the impact we're having on the environment. Things that everyone listening to this already knows, but we don't have more land, we don't have more water, we don't have more fertilizer. We can't keep on spraying agrochemicals as we have been. And so we need to start being more efficient, more effective about how we're managing crops to make sure we make enough to feed people without destroying the planet. And so that was really where we saw the future of this whole industry going, was replacing agri-chems with agri-data. And fortunately, we were quite right in that prediction, and the whole industry is moving that way now.
Yeah, I just having a read, obviously, prior to this chat, and the global agri-tech market. And obviously these figures don't take them, but if they're close, it's still massive, is estimated to reach $45 billion by 2028, with a compound annual growth rate of up to 14% over that period, which is huge. And precision agriculture, is that what you would call where you sit?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it says that was valued at $6 billion in 2020 and is projected to reach $23 billion by 2030. As you said, you're in this market that's booming as well, really, I suspect.
Absolutely. Precision agriculture is very closely related to what we're doing, but actually what we're doing kind of sits underneath quite a lot more of that. So precision agriculture refers to several different things, including the precision robots that will go out and do the spraying in field.
Right, the actual machinery to either harvest or to put out the...
Definitely, and the plant breeding and the knowledge that goes alongside that to make sure that we've got the right things in the right places. What we're doing is data, particularly having high resolution data, understanding what crops are doing. And for anyone listening who's not familiar with Outfield, we're 100% focused on orchard crops in fruit. And what we're really working towards is being able to provide the right dose of different chemicals and different treatments to every tree in an orchard, to make sure that you're maximizing the number of fruit that comes off of that tree that can be sold. But on the other side of the equation, that's really good for the grower and for what happens in field. We're also forecasting yields by knowing what's really happening in the field. And in doing so, we can prime the whole supply chain, tell people how much fruit they're going to have, let it be shipped to the right places, let people plan all this international movement, and also plan sales contracts in advance, which obviously is better for the consumer, better for the businesses, and better for the growers.
So I guess sometimes do the buyers, is it quite late all the way up to harvest, and so they've got sort of a contract to buy a certain amount of stuff, and you don't know what you're going to actually harvest. You end up with a bumper harvest, but they've only bought a bit of it, and the rest goes to waste. That's
the truth is, growers do an amazing job with their orchards based on very limited data sets. But in an orchard, you might have 10,000 trees, and you might send someone to look at what's happening on 10 of those trees to really understand how many fruit you've got, what you should be spraying, what the conditions of the trees are. And then, as we were saying, to forecast those yields, sales contracts started in the UK already now, even though the fruit are about the size of your thumbnail. And so those contracts have some variability in them, but as we get closer and closer to harvest, you have a lot less that you can do about it. The markets need to know where their fruit's coming from, so they need to plan to bring it in from overseas or whatever it is.
Which is where you come in.
Exactly that.
I'm just going to stop you just to briefly go back. to give us more detail about how you actually get that data. So it involves drones, it involves data, and I guess it involves software or AI to predict things, or...
Absolutely. So a grower who uses Outfield now can buy an off-the-shelf drone anywhere in the world. It costs £2,500. And you can have one on your doorstep tomorrow morning. We never have to see it. We never have to touch it. You can then download a flight plan for your orchards off of our web app, and you go and press 2 buttons, and the drone will survey your entire orchard in 20 minutes. It will send us pictures of the trees, which go into a cloud-based computing system, and we have a suite of different algorithms which will analyze those images and tell you how many blossoms there are on every tree, how many fruit there are on the trees, what the foliage density is, look at the condition of the trees, and then also forecast those yields.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that isn't, so that's not, there's no hardware that you provided. That's an off-the-shelf drone gets to have the resolution to capture all that information. And
that's very much been my co-founder Ollie's vision since the start, is that hardware is hard. It's a very difficult sector to get into, but it also means that this isn't ubiquitous around the world, because if you have expensive bespoke hardware, it's hard to deploy that in Bolivia. Whereas drones have now become such a mature technology that you can buy an off-the-shelf, cutting-edge, high-resolution camera that flies itself with amazing specifications in Bolivia tomorrow.
Right.
So we may as well use the existing systems that are there.
Yeah, and that's going to mean that because you're also there's a commercial aspect to it, but it's going to make it more accessible, and it's going to make it obtainable by more people if the hardware is affordable, and if it's off any drones, then it's going to be more affordable. So
absolutely, and that really feeds into the vision of the business. Yeah. I talk a lot about the fourth agricultural revolution, and it was what we were mentioning earlier about going from chemicals and breeding over to data. But in order for that to really have the impact that we want, to be reducing chemical usage and saving the planet whilst making food, it's got to be available everywhere, not just in first world countries that already have access to technology. Yeah. And so, this is very much Ollie's vision, that we can use existing hardware technologies. And I mean, we use existing technologies from other sectors as well. So while some of the things we do in machine learning and data science is very bespoke and unique, where possible, we're trying to just use existing infrastructure and existing data sets, using existing cloud computing services, and just putting together things into the agriculture sector that have been already robustly trialed in other sectors. Yeah. So that's a big part of the thesis. Right.
Okay, I think we'll probably come back to the products and services and learn a bit more about maybe where it's going. But I'm also really interested to learn about how you got to where you are, because a lot of listeners are early stage founders, or they're people with an entrepreneurial thought. They might have an idea or a concept, and they're wanting to take that further. Again, likewise, we've got a lot of listeners who are more advanced stages of their ventures, so it's useful to cover both. So let's wind back a bit. So you mentioned the oil and gas elements. So were you were based up in Aberdeen. The north, in Aberdeen?
Yeah. So the first 5 or 6 years of my career, I was working in offshore oil and gas as a risk consultant, mostly doing fire and explosion engineering.
Yeah. So how did that come about?
Like most things in life, it was largely serendipitous. I did graduate from university, but I kind of also fell out of university because I had tuberculosis in my last year, which I wouldn't recommend. It was very, very hard ride. Yeah. And so I took a job that one of my friends offered me because he said, our company will take you on if you'd like to come and do some work, and we'll see how it goes. And so it wasn't really a plan, but the opportunity was there, and I seized it. And then they were opening office in Aberdeen, so we did that. Yeah. And then there was ongoing opportunities. I have an engineering degree, and obviously that was very useful, but it was really a case of seizing the opportunities that were in front of us.
Yeah. And then, so where's the jump? Did you meet Ollie in Cambridge, or was that?
As it happens, Ollie and I knew each other from university, so we were doing engineering degrees in Durham at the same time. And that has made a lot of aspects of the business really easy, because before we started the business together, he already had keys to my house. Having trust in the founding team is absolutely critical, and I know a lot of solo founders, and it's very doable. I'm not sure I could do that. I've got a lot of respect for solo founders, because when your back's really against the wall and no one else understands, it's nice to have someone standing next to you.
It's funny, I was going to ask you about finding the co-founder, and I guess it comes in different ways. It might be someone that you've got similar interests or similar academic background or etc. So were you both working on this concept or idea right from the start?
Absolutely.
And how long was it before you had a bigger team, or that you brought anyone else on?
So we had what I think, at least in Cambridge, is quite an unusual path to where we are now. That Ollie and I, exactly to say, we had a first phone call when I was still living in Aberdeen and sort of discussed what we wanted to try and do. But then, unlike a lot of businesses, we didn't sort of go through ideation and then go out to pitch and raise money. We decided that we really wanted to test the market. My understanding of what agricultural life is like on the ground was very limited, and Ollie's likewise. And so we wanted to go and find out where the problems really were, go and talk to some clients. And it's a piece of advice that everyone gives all the time, but oh God, it's true. The necessity of really understanding your clients, because you aren't your client. You have to go and find out what they really want. And even if you think you know that, you'll talk to another one and you're probably wrong. So we spent the first 2 or 3 years working with research bodies here in the UK, also working with growers and developing different aerial imagery and computer vision products to support different aspects of farming. Now, it's worth saying that agriculture in general is a huge sector, and arable, wheat and barley, that sort of thing, is as different from horticulture, orchards and lettuces, as they both are from livestock.
Right.
And so there's massive differences in how all those are run, how they are as different sectors. And so what we did was explored all of it. We tried different things. We worked on wheat and barley assessments. We did sugar beet counting in fields. And we kept on getting dragged back to horticulture, to permanent apple crops, permanent orchard crops. And that was really, what drove us into the first phase. Yeah. What was great about that was we were working as consultants. We were making enough money to sort of cover ourselves.
Within the sector you're working as consultants.
Exactly
and that's without... So you've not got a product at this stage, you're just researching the market and researching the customer.
Exactly. The product was that we'll come and help you find a solution to this problem.
Right.
And especially then, it was so novel and so left field that people were interested to pay us to find out what was possible in the space. Yeah. And if you go back far enough, Ollie was building our drones on his kitchen table, which is a very good incentive to move away to off-the-shelf hardware. But we did all sorts of things back then. And as we kind of focused down on where we thought we were going to be valuable, that was when we realized we had a product that could be scalable. There was a real opportunity to make a consultancy that could have been sort of 12 or 13 people and made a lot of money, but that wasn't where we wanted to go because it didn't address the underlying problem that we wanted to fix in the world.
So you talked about a lot of our guests who come to talk start in the kitchen or on the kitchen table sort of thing. And so it's been a number of years, and you know the market a lot better than most because you're working as consultants in that field and also doing research for something that you know where you want to go, and you're starting to sort of hone in on horticulture. And so at that stage, have you got a company, or when did the company actually found that we know as Outfield?
So we founded the company right at the start, back in 2016. But what the product is, what we're delivering, has evolved a lot over that time. Okay. And fortunately, the people who we're working with really understood that. And we worked very hard. I think it's especially true in this sector, but others as well, to make sure that we weren't over-promising, to make sure that we were telling people exactly where we were as a business. And people were very supportive of that, because as long as they got on board with the vision of what we were trying to achieve and had some faith in the fact that we could deliver it, that really added a lot. So that was great. And I guess. Sorry.
So I was going to say, did you need to raise any money at this stage, or did the consultancy side of it, was that enough to get you going? Yeah,
we took on a very early convertible note from somebody, actually just an angel. Who was more interested in the drone aspect than the agricultural aspect, but was really interested to see what we could do and got a lot out of meeting with us, talking to us, understanding what we had learned in the space. In the end, they decided not to follow that investment, and they stepped out when we did our funding round, but that was what they got out of that. And that worked out really well. It wound up just being a loan for 4 years. Yeah, and the convertible note, for those that might not be aware of exactly what that means. So what that really means is you take on a loan from somebody, with loan interest terms. It was all very favourable, but it also means that when we get to a funding round, they have the right to turn their loan, instead of calling it back as cash, they can take equity in the funding round.
Okay.
Normally that comes with a bit of a discount from the other investors because they've come in early, so they've taken on more of a risk. But it just means that they get to have a guarantee that there'll be an investor in whatever your funding round is.
It's a great way to, as you said, get someone on who you know is going to be a potential holder later on, and it gives you money.
Startup cash.
Startup cash, yeah, quickly.
And one big lesson that we took away, I guess, from seeing other people doing this, which was, I guess, useful to hear, I hope, is that there are some companies in this space who thought they'd sort of centered in on what would be a good idea quite early on. They saw that there was a market there, but didn't know how they were going to get after it. And so they started raising money for it. And they had a compelling case. And so they raised a seed, and they went out and developed some technology, and they went and raised a Series A. And they started raising, sort of into the tens of millions. And they were very bound to their first concept because that's what they promised their investors, and then that's what they promised people who they're trying to deliver to. There was so much money coming through. And in the end, the concept wasn't really the right one. In fact, it was quite a long way off, and some of what they were hoping to do was impossible. And it became very, very difficult for them to deliver what they'd said. And for them, I think the biggest problem really was that they'd taken investment early. I think it's worth sharing that because I think a lot of founders, a lot of people viewing the startup space from the outside see fundraising as sort of the objective of the business, and it's really not. The objective of a business is to have a business, to make money, to be profitable, to deliver what it is that you're promising, and to have the impact that you want in the world. Fundraising is a tool to allow that, but honestly, if you can do it without fundraising, you're going to be in a much better place. So it's just, I guess it's to take the shine off that slightly. Fundraising is a wonderful thing and should be celebrated when you achieve it as well. It's a hard thing to do, and it can really change the direction, the acceleration of a company. But it's also not necessarily a great idea, and it definitely comes with baggage. Yeah,
that is really, really good advice. And again, for earlier stage founders and entrepreneurs, it's something that's on their mind often. And again, we get asked that quite often. Do I need? Well, it's just like, well, no one else really knows, but it doesn't have to be the sort of de facto. This is where we need money straight away. It's like, well, just hold fire. Can you grow organically? And sometimes that's the best way.
I think that also ties into what I'd say is probably the best bit of advice I ever got when I was starting up. I've had the privilege of seeing quite a lot of early stage founders, and I think this is true for a lot of people. It's really worth taking some time early in the business to understand where your lines of affordable loss are as a person. And what I mean by that is how much of your money can you spend on this, but also how much of your life are you willing to put into it? How much of your patience of your spouse are you willing to put into it? How many events are you willing to miss to do this? And just have a really clear idea of that for the first year or so, because it means that you can be 100% committed to it until you're 100% out. And I see a lot of early stage founders who spend a lot of time worrying about, should I be back in my old job? Is my wife going to kill me about this? Yeah, am I in trouble, with this or that? And when can I keep on going till? If you know that really clearly, it takes a lot of distractions away from the business, allows you to focus, and it also lets you have a real clarity about where your deadlines are, which I think can inform a lot of what the early stage business necessities are. So I'm very glad that someone told me that, because it's something I still do. I reassess that every 6 months or every year to make sure that we are on track for where this is taking us as well.
That's excellent advice. In terms of entrepreneurial training or support, did you, for the business school or accelerate programs or accelerators, incubators, that sort of thing, did you take advantage of those sorts of services?
Absolutely. We were really lucky quite early on to be accepted onto the business school's accelerator program, Accelerate Cambridge, which is fantastic. And it's definitely improved over time as well. I think the mentors they have in there right now are really great. I think the biggest takeaway for us from that, and again, just giving advice now, my only advice that you should really listen to is to be very cautious about whose advice you take, and to make sure that you absorb advice into your view of what's going on. And I think we were talking about this just before the session, but anyone who's giving you advice, be them an investor or a mentor, probably only has a couple of hours at most of context for what's happening in your business, what's happening with your clients, what's happening in the development of the team, all the rest of it. And so whilst their advice can be very, very good, you know the context better than they ever will. So I think you've got to take what people say and sort of mix it into what they do. We had lots of other support around though, and I think the best support I've had as a founder is from other founders. We were saying earlier about the swimming club, which has got a few founders in it. But what's great about that is there's people who really understand what being a founder is all about. And honestly, it can be quite a lonely road being a founder, because there are other jobs like this and there are other things in life like this, but it's rare to have a career where you just can't say no, where it becomes your top priority. It can be very conflicting for people who have got kids, because then you have two things you can't say no to. And so it's really good to be able to talk to people who understand what that's about and can share war stories, and in particular to see what holes they fell in so that you can avoid them as well.
Yeah, again here at Ideaspace and in any of the three sites, that's what people gain most of all, is just the sounding board, especially for those. There's a lot of founders who are just on their own, and to not even have a co-founder to bounce things off. But people are so willing to share their mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which I'm sort of harking back to my flying days of in the crew room. The most valuable lessons you could get aren't necessarily from, there's lots of publications to read about accidents that might happen or incidents that you can avoid, and but the most valuable one is in the crew room, where someone is talking about something that they've just done. And if you're in a culture that likes to share and that isn't no one's judgmental about your mistakes that you've made, but in fact really open about them, it's how you learn best.
Absolutely.
Hearing someone else make the mistake and telling you.
I think it's very good therapy as well. I think a lot of advice amongst founders is also just having the forum in which to clear things out and to feel confident and have some support. But I say this quite a lot, but I think that CEOs are very good at making their companies sound great. And if you look at companies from the outside, everything's fantastic, and there was a plan and they followed it and it was great. Often the plan gets written after the execution. It's just the way that things are in early stage businesses, and it's often quite fraught. And I think if you, a lot like the social media world that we live in, where you only see the best sides of people's lives, I think you only ever see the best side of companies. And so it's quite nice to know the hardships that people go through as well, and there are a lot.
That's such a good analogy, and also probably great for people to hear, unfortunately, that there are a whole bunch of mistakes made and no one's got the answers, because there's no one way of doing it. And that'll be music to a lot of people's ears, knowing that the mistakes they're making are made by a plethora of founders.
There's a founder I know who runs what's now a very successful business, and he often says that he made so many mistakes that there were no more mistakes left to make, so he found the right business. And that sounds about right, to be honest. We were talking also about this before the session, sort of, what it takes to be a founder, what makes a good founder. And I think the only real trait that is worth cultivating to be a good founder is the resilience to recover from errors, because there will be some. And the reason is that you're probably doing something that's never been done before. If it's been done before, someone else will have done it. With that in mind, though, there's no other real makeup of a founder that makes for a good founder, because you're doing something that's unique. You can't copy someone else to do that. It's got to be your own child. And so, although obviously you need to be aware of where your strengths and weaknesses are, and you need to fill in the gaps that you need to for your business, it really is about your business and the uniqueness of it.
And I'm interested in the job separation when you're starting out. Obviously, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're wearing lots of hats, or whatever the phrase you want to use. Did you early on yourself and Ollie decide, right, I'm going to be more technical, I'm going to be more business, or I'm going to be more sales, and or marketing?
The truth is, at an early stage, you do everything all the time, but you certainly lean towards your own propensities. And for us, Ollie had a much deeper understanding of the technology and of what drones were capable of, and that's very much how he thinks. I had more experience with sales, with teams, and with externally facing communications, and that's kind of how we broke things down. Now, the nice thing about having two of us, we kind of have a co-CEO role, which is quite unusual. But the nice thing about that is that I know most of the things that Ollie does, and he knows most of the things that I do. And so we can step in for each other when we need to, because you don't have a lot of choice over where the pressures come from. It gives you a bit more flexibility. The truth is, though, that you will never finish the to-do list as a founder. if nothing else, because one of the things on the to-do list is to make yourself more work. So you've got to go out of your way to set your mindset ready for prioritization, to take the things that you want to and to try and maximize your chance of success, not to try and complete the business. It doesn't work, right? But yeah, so as Ollie and I sort of came through, we realized that there were gaps that we had in our understanding. And I think that's definitely what happens from pre-seed to seed, or possibly from seed to Series A, depending on how people define those things, is at the early stages about the founding team and what they can deliver. As you grow on, it's about how you identify the weaknesses of that team and fill them, how you build out a business where you aren't doing everything, but in fact you're just doing a very limited number of things. And one of the skills as we've grown is definitely about delegating. It's hard. Delegating away product management and delegating away sales is very, very difficult, because it's something that you always feel like you can do best. But just because you might be best at it doesn't mean you're the best person to do it. Right. You can't do everything, right?
You talked about obviously delegating. So your first hires, where did you find them? Sorry, they're not commodity. How did you go about getting your first hire?
Yeah, so when we were first hiring up, we were really looking into our community and sort of looking for people that fit what we were trying to achieve. And one of the big markers for us was also understanding the vision and being on board with that, because without that, it's just a job, which isn't really what we're looking for. But we've tried very hard, once we got past sort of 3 or 4 hires, to move outside of our network to do wider job postings. We're remote now, so we also try and look outside the UK to get as broad a diversity of different experiences, mindsets, diversity of thought, I think is a good phrase for that, albeit quite nebulous, to make sure that we don't just have one idea in the room. And Ollie and I, both being engineers from Durham, there is quite a lot of commonality between how we've been trained to think. Fortunately, we're very different people and we actually fit very nicely like that. But we've realized that we had to really go outside of the pool of people we knew to make sure we're hiring people who have very different ways of thinking about problems. One of the things that's very hard to do in interview is to check for diversity of thought. It's something that Ollie can talk about much more than I can, because he does more of our hiring. But diversity of thought isn't the same as diversity, in that your race, gender, creed, experience don't necessarily drive a different way of thinking. And so the only way to really check for that is to solve problems in the room with people that you're looking at hiring, and see how they approach them, and see if they look at things in a different way from the skills that you currently have in the team. And that's not necessarily driven by obvious markers of diversity.
That's really interesting. So the way that you actually interview helps find that sort of those diverse characteristics in people.
Absolutely, and recognizing the importance of diversity is an incredible asset, as opposed to the other way around. It's not something that we have to go out of our way to try and ensure. It's something that we...
We're. By the way, for listeners, we do record this podcast in our offices in Idea Space. So we've got founders walking up and down the corridors, which is great to hear. Happy ones.
You hear the future happening. It's
great. And it sounds a happy future. There was some giggling past the door, which is great. So we're at the stage where you've taken on some hires. Now, a lot of them are, I guess, software engineers, if they're designing or coming up with algorithms to work out the yields and
because of the nature of our business, we've got quite a lot of different bases that need to be covered. So we've got several software engineers, exactly as you say, who cover things from machine learning, algorithms building, data management, data sets, and obviously we've got huge amounts of data coming through, and also backends and cloud computing. We also have front-end engineers who are taking care of the web app, and that's so important for us because it's really the client-facing part, and it has a huge influence on what they view as the business. We also have operational people who are working with the drones and who are building out the new generation of what we can do with that and making sure that our clients are happy, client success management. We then have salespeople who are bringing people into the pipeline and making sure that they're happy and then making them stay in the pipeline and all of that side of things. And then we also have people more on the business side, HR, oversight, that kind of stuff. And that is one of the last things that leaves the founder's grasp, I think, and that's definitely something that we're still quite tightly holding on to. But over time, some of those functions get passed out as well. Yeah.
And so, how many in total in the business?
As of tomorrow, 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's... Do you find a sense of responsibility as one of the co-CEOs when you're starting? I don't want to sort of knock it early on, but early on when there's just one or two hires, or your sense of responsibility to them is probably less. But do you feel that responsibility?
Absolutely, very, very, very much so. And it's a complete privilege to be able to do this and to be able to select people that have the same vision and that fit the culture that you want to build. But it's also a huge responsibility. I think a lot of founders, when they're first starting out, think that they're going to have a lot of freedom. I think a lot of people do this when they go freelance as well. They think they're going to be able to, choose what they do, and they can within the context of what their clients want. Now, when you're a founder, you have that problem, but you're also betrothed to your employees. You've got to put their priorities very highly, and also to your investors. And so although you do have freedom to do what you want, you have freedom to do what you want as long as that aligns with the stakeholders that you've got. And so it's wonderful, and I absolutely love it, but it's also not necessarily the liberation that people think it is when they're first going into it. The other thing about having employees is, you were saying sort of, how responsible do you feel to them? And I think there's a big difference between being a boss and being a manager. And being a boss is putting the company first, and being a manager is putting the people first. And there's always a bit of a conflict between those, especially when you have challenging people that you're hiring. That conflict, I feel, became a lot stronger for us when we started hiring people who have families. So our earliest hires were largely graduates, or even people doing PhDs or postdocs who had a bit of spare time. And you don't feel the same pressure when you're hiring people like that, because you know that they'll be okay. But when someone's got kids and they've got a husband or a wife, you suddenly feel a lot more pressure to make sure that things work out. That's in the nature of growing a business, though.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also, the more successful and the larger you grow, that doesn't sort of dwindle or wane. It only probably gets more. Do you think you've grown as a CEO? Do you think that you've, I was going to say, learnt to deal with that responsibility, but I guess you just the responsibility is always there, but you just learn how to manage it better.
Absolutely. I think running a company is far and away the fastest way to grow as a person, to grow skill sets, to grow in your career, because you have to do so much all the time. And it's incredibly compelling and it's very good fun, but it means that it's very time consuming. I've never seen anything like it for sort of immersion in terms of learning things. And so, we absolutely have grown as sort of a founding team in so many ways. And especially when you're starting out, there are so many occasions where you say, this needs to be done and we don't know how to do it, but there's nobody else here. So we'd better find a way.
Yeah.
So we definitely have grown as a founding team. I think though that's in the nature of founding a business, that when you first start out, everybody who founds a business doesn't know how to run that business. Everyone's got to be a first-time founder at some point. And so I think it's very easy to look at founders around you, especially, as we were saying earlier, that CEOs make their company seem fantastic and make it seem like they know what they're doing, and think, I can't do this, I don't know what's going on. But actually, everyone's been there as well. And so it's a bit of a misconception to say that you have to have all the skills in place before you start. You don't even know what those skills are going to be yet, and they won't be the same for you as they are for anybody else. You will have to learn on the go, but that's part of the job.
If someone was to come up to you, your nephew, or you don't look old enough to have older nephews.
Maybe I am. Yeah.
Who comes up to you and says, I'm really thinking about founding my own startup. What would you say? Would you recommend it based on your experience that you've had?
That's a really interesting question, and I guess it's interesting, especially when you make it that personal with someone that that would be part of my family, for example. I think I absolutely love this, which isn't the same as I'd necessarily recommend it. And I think for somebody who's going into it, I think you want to go in with your eyes open and take your time before you make the jump. There's never a perfect time to start a company. So if you know that you want to, you just got to go ahead and try it. But I think the biggest thing for people to be aware of is that only about 1 in 10 companies that get founded will ever make revenue of any kind. Most companies never find someone who's willing to pay them for what they're doing. And of those, only about 1 in 10 will ever make it to a million ARR, £1 million of repeating revenue, which is probably a good gauge of when you're a mature company. And so there are people who are cleverer than you, who have got better ideas than you, who will also fail making a company. And a lot of it's serendipity and luck. And I think if you don't go into founding a company with that in mind, with your eyes open about that, and with a bit of a exit plan for almost when it goes wrong, more than if it goes wrong, because it's quite likely to, and then still be happy to give it your all and give it your best shot and maximize your chances of making it work, then I don't think you're ready to start a company.
Mm. Do you know, it's interesting because it also means, I guess, with that knowledge that when it does fail, you can also not take it personally.
Yes.
Because, hey, that's statistically it's going to more likely be that way. So don't take it personally. And often you see founders saying, right, this in my third startup, I did this or whatever. Because, as you said, sometimes it's just a matter of luck and serendipity for sure.
I think the statistics bear out that the most successful companies are usually people's third tries. Now, we're very lucky that we've managed to get our company as far as we have and be as successful as we have on our first go. I think the support of people around us has been absolutely instrumental in that we've taken on experience from other people. But I think that's exactly right. You know, you've got to go into it being aware that it really might not work.
So I'm just going to jump ahead to back into the sort of business itself. And you've found some obviously drones. There must have been a lot of work in getting the drones that work with the platform that you've got, and you'd already sort of had a list or a database of potential clients, people that you work with anyway. In fact, even those clients that had said, can you help us with the solution? You're just like, well, we've come back. Here is the solution, and it's our own one.
Yep.
In finding more and more customers, is it that the agriculture or farmers, if I call orchard growers or growers, is it that is it difficult for them to adopt new technologies? I guess there's a slightly outdated version in my head of growers and farmers, that a lot of them might be sort of traditional, set in their ways, especially in countries that have been slower to adopt new technology. Is it hard to convince people that this flying drone and this app and this computer program is actually really going to help them?
I think if you go back 5 years in the history of Outfield, that was much more the case. And part of the reason for that was that farmers in every part of the agricultural sector had previously been bitten by technology bugs, where people thought they had a good idea, but didn't really understand the market, didn't understand the client. And so people, some growers who were quite forward thinking, have a graveyard of technologies in a shed somewhere that they stumped up some cash for and it didn't work out. And I actually think that made them very healthily skeptical, because it meant that we have to prove that what we're doing makes sense and we're really tuned into what they need before they go for it. Having said that, especially on the horticulture side, but with growers in general, they are much more visionary and open. They're much more accepting. They're much more equality focused and environmentally focused than I expected from that stereotype. And I think where that stereotype comes from is that they have to be business focused first, because most growers operate on a single-digit profit margin on a good year, which means if they have a bad year, they're making minus 2% on their whole farm. So they can't afford the time or the resources to mess around. So they're happy to support you as much as humanly possible, but they can't just dump resources into making this happen. What has been incredibly helpful over the last 5 years, though, is that I think not only is the industry moving more towards being tech-focused, and especially the big players now will have a data person in-house. They'll possibly have an innovation officer who runs things, which has been very, very powerful. And that's because they understand this is where the technology is going and that they have to be in front of that to continue winning. But also I think the evolution of technology and the technology sector in this bull market we've had for the last decade or so has been really great for advertising the potential of technology. And so 5 years ago, when we said that a drone will fly itself around your orchard without you having to touch it, everyone said, no, it won't. But now people know that Tesla vehicles have done 1 million hours of driving around California or whatever it is. And so these concepts now seem a lot more tangible, a lot more possible. Things like machine learning was just a word if you go back 10 years. Now everyone knows at a high level what that really means. So that's been really useful for us for technology adoption and for the technology credibility of what we're delivering.
Yeah, I'm sure. Even in fact, I think it was just yesterday that Amazon Amazon Prime Air, or I think it might be called, have just announced that they are testing their first beyond line of sight, I guess, drones for use in one specific place in California, I believe. But I'm sure once that gets adopted, where you get drones delivering parcels in reality, I know it's been talked about for 10 years, but it as of yesterday, it's actually happening. So I'm sure once that gets seen by lots of people, then suddenly the idea of drones just constantly flying around farms of all sizes is going to just be completely accepted.
Absolutely. And what is phenomenal as well is a lot of the ancillary technologies that support Outfield are already here. What we'd think of as being the future of fruit farming actually is happening today. Things like drones that can self-launch themselves out of a box without any user involvement, survey an orchard, come back, upload data, and land upload data and charge themselves without you having to touch them at all. That's a technology that we can actually deploy right now today. People are using it on chemicals facilities for surveying. It sounds very sci-fi, but it's here. Likewise, tractor systems that can spray agrochemicals in the right tree as long as they've got the data from Outfield. Those already exist. Using GPS technology, they can turn nozzles on and off and treat every tree independently. Again, going back 5 years, this didn't exist. But that's a trial that we ran last week in South Africa. It's very possible.
Wow. In fact, I saw on your blog, you do get to travel quite a lot, don't you? The website's excellent, by the way, and the videos, Ollie's presentation skills on the video, fantastic. I found them really, really informative.
Absolutely. And it's one of the joys of an international company is that if you do enjoy traveling, you definitely can. At the moment, Ollie does more of the traveling than I do because he does more of the operations than I do, but I think he really enjoys it. And in my previous career, I did probably a bit too much traveling, so I'm quite happy to be based in one place for a little while.
So we've talked about the market being big and people more likely to adopt these new technologies. Is Outfield very specific to orchards? It seems like it is now. Is that something that you've looked at? Obviously, you can develop new products to incorporate new markets. You're just going to be specialists in this. I was going to say specialists in this field. I was going to say that, wasn't I?
Oh, we have a moratorium at Outfield on having puns. There's too many.
Sorry, that was just...
Well, because we're now taking flight, we've really got our roots in the ground. Right, so we're going through a growth phase, blossoming quite a lot. Feel free to cut these out.
Totally unintended. Completely unintended. No, so are you are you becoming specialist? Oh, sorry, you are specialists, but would you look to develop into other crops or other types of agriculture?
Absolutely. It's actually another very good piece of advice that we received early on, which was to focus again, because it's very easy to do three things badly. It's quite hard to do one thing well. Yeah. So we had to focus on making sure that, we've gotten even more focused than just apple crops to start. We've got one particular canopy structure in certain geographies that we've gone after, and now we're delivering that competently. Now we can start building out from there. What's very worth considering, though, I think for anyone starting a business, is to have the market that you want to be getting after in mind, to have scalability in mind. You don't need to have all the answers right away, but it's very useful to have that flexibility baked in. And so for us, we've started on apples, and the reason for apples is because that's the fruit that we've got in this part of the world, and also because they're facing one of the highest pressures of any fruit right now, because they're largely in regions where labour costs are very high. If you look at things like citrus, usually the labour costs are much lower in the warmer regions, and so they don't have the same pressures to resolve this. But beyond apples, we're already building our systems to be modular so that we can train in for vineyards, so we can train in for stone fruit, and possibly in the future citrus as well. Really, all permanent fruit crops are on the table. Anything that's in the ground for 10 years we can work with. And so for us, focus again, but also being ready to scale out to what are some really quite amazing and huge crops around the world.
Really, really exciting. And on that, I guess with the scaling, are there any plans to raise again?
Absolutely. So we did a round back in August last year and got some absolutely fantastic investors on board. A lot of people from the agricultural sector, which was lovely, as well as some deep tech people here in Cambridge. And in the next 6 months, we're looking at raising again. So we'll be kicking off a funding round at the end of this month, which we will be advertising quite widely when it goes, with a view to raising about 4 million. And that's to take us from where we are now with a product that's been trialed extensively with paying clients to being commercially ready and launching that in the Northern Hemisphere 2023. But also to continue building off of this incredible data set that we've got available now bringing in things like soil data, weather data, agrochemicals data, to build out more of a digital twin over the next few years, which can really allow us to forecast and assess the impacts of different effects on the orchard. All the things that we were originally talking about making more fruit and using less resources, all of that can be done much better. The more accurate, the more effective, and the more detailed that digital twin becomes. So those are the two focus areas for us for the next 2 years.
Amazing, and I'm sure there's going to be huge amounts of interest in the raise. So
we certainly hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, it's been really fascinating because it's a sector I don't know very well, and it was really interesting doing some sort of background reading. But it must make you both really proud, or all of you, your whole team, knowing that there's a successful company, but there's also real positive impact, which we clearly need more companies like you that have a real strong vision, that have a sense of responsibility to the planet, to people, to how we go about things, whether it be growing crops or becoming more efficient, or less pesticides or less chemicals and less waste, etc., etc. So you must all be incredibly proud.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And for anyone listening who's thinking about starting a business, I know I've touched on some of the harder bits of doing that today, and it's worth going into it with your eyes open. It is hard, but also it is wonderful. It's fantastic. It's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And if you ever want to have a chat about sort of how to make that happen, feel free to reach out.
That's great. And you can be found on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jim McDougall. Outfield's on LinkedIn, so you can get us there, or just drop us an email at jim@outfield.xyz.
Excellent, thank you. I'm also also interested in touching on one thing. Obviously, it's been in the news with the new farming policy, and also the fact that the way that the globe is, or each country is looking at how they manage their own farming and their own agriculture, because people are aware that you often need to produce your own stuff instead of. It's really weird. We've gone from a sort of very isolated view to a very global view, and I wouldn't say it's isolationism again, but people are just aware, or governments are aware of making sure that they can feed themselves. Is any of that affecting how you?
There's a lot in there that affects what we're doing, and I think food security is something that we've been very aware of for a long time, and it is an important topic, because especially as the world is going through a sort of change of world order, depending on who you believe, there's the potential for conflict, and there's definitely pressures around making sure that you can support the population you've got. Again, it's the sort of thing that in the longer term, Outfield's very much attached to, because as we're gathering more data about crops across whole regions of the planet, we can assess all sorts of things. And we care about it more from a climate change perspective, because as the climate is changing and we're dealing with permanent crops, we want to be looking at where we're putting them and how we're managing that most effectively. But again, it's very useful for being able to see where things are growing internationally. And whilst we're not so focused on calories with what we do, it's not like wheat or rice. Nutrition is absolutely critical for growing populations, and so making sure that we have the right nutrition being available in the right places is again something that you can do with the kind of data that we're outputting. The other pressures that we're seeing a lot at the moment, and it's something that we're hearing from our growers and also, as you say, from the government, is that things like fertilizer prices are going through the roof. In South Africa, what cost last year 7 Rand now costs 32 Rand, and it makes some growers unsustainable. It makes them, go from being in the black to being in the red. And so we are working hard to make sure that the technologies that we're delivering can help them to make the most fruit they can, whilst also managing these increasing costs. And it's a fantastic time to be delivering these systems right now, because it really is going to make a big impact on how much food's made in the world, to the lives of some of these growers, and to make sure that we do have enough food for the coming century.
Really fascinating, Jim. Thank you so much. There's been so much great advice and insight from your own experiences that I know will help all our listeners. So thank you so much for coming into Idea Space West. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. See you for a swim soon.
Yeah, cheers. For more information or any inquiries about joining IdeaSpace, please contact us via ideaspace.cam.ac.uk or via any of our social media channels.